This is the Hoka Clifton 10, and it gets the same visual update as its bigger brother, the Bondi 9. So does that mean the Clifton will get the same surprisingly pleasant upgrade? It's time to lace up the Clifton 10 and take it for a run. Yo, what's going on? My name is Kafuzi and I'm a non-elite runner who reviews running shoes here on YouTube. And today I want to talk to you guys all about the Hoka Clifton 10. But before I give you my thoughts on this shoe, I do want to go over some disclosures. This is a pair of shoes that I bought with my own money. No one had to send it to me. No one's paying me to make this video or to include their brand in this video, and no one's going to get a chance to preview any of my footage or my thoughts before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. So with that disclosure out of the way, let's talk about the Hoka Clifton 10. Let's start with the specs. I don't have info on the stack height for this shoe, but from what I can glean from Hoka's website, there is 2 millimeters more stack height in the heel this year, and they're using compression molded EVA in this shoe, which is the same type of midsole foam that the Hoka Clifton has used, I think, since the beginning of the Hoka Clifton. But the biggest change that I could see from the information on the website is that the drop on the Clifton is changing. And again, I think from the beginning of the Clifton, it's always been a 5 millimeter drop. This year, it's changing to an 8 millimeter drop. So that 2 millimeters you're gaining in the heel actually nets out to a -1 millimeter of foam in the forefoot. Now, protecting all this rubber is a pattern that we've seen many years. It's very similar to what we've seen last year in the Clifton 9, and that's similar to what we saw in the Clifton 8, 7, and 6. The one change that I do see here is that they've shifted around a little bit of the placement of these rubber pods that are protecting this midsole and that are also contributing to grip. We've lost a couple of pods of rubber right here in the middle of the shoe near the arch, but we have seen like the amount of coverage of each of these pods is a little bit bigger where they do have them. The other thing that I'll note though is that the rubber seems to be thinner than it was last year. It seems like there was more rubber kind of protruding out from the bottom of the shoe last year than we've seen this year, and it seems like it's a little bit thinner this year, although they might just have inset the rubber a little bit further deeper into the midsole foam here, so I can't say for sure, but it does feel overall like it's a bit softer. Moving to the upper, we have a very similar material that we saw last year, and the overall silhouette is almost identical. Again, there are some subtle changes you can notice. There are a bit more mesh holes for air to come in and out of the shoe, so it's a little bit more breathable, and they are using a different last this year compared to last year. And the last is kind of the mold of the foot that they're using to shape the shoe. There's a little bit more volume all throughout the shoe, I'd say, from the top of the laces all the way through the toe box. So there's a little bit more space for your foot, and there is a little bit more width for that pinky toe over on the edge of the shoe as well. All things that I think are welcome changes. Visually, it doesn't look like there's all that much different happening, but once you put it on your foot, you can definitely notice the difference. The other thing that seems to be happening is that this Achilles flare gets bigger and bigger every year. And I feel like at the beginning, when heel flares kind of first hit the running shoe market, they were a way to relieve pressure against the back of the Achilles, but these days they all seem to be turning into kind of like pull tabs or shoehorn grips so you can get the shoe onto your foot. And this is very comfortable, but it's getting even bigger and bigger every single year. But otherwise, the level of padding and the level of thickness of the material is pretty much the same. They've lost the gusset to this tongue. There's no gusset to it at all. Last year, there was only a medial side gusset, but this year they've just gone away with it altogether. I'm not sure why they made the change. Perhaps they thought that since they are already weaving the laces through the top of the tongue, the gusset might have been superfluous. Altogether, these changes ended up in the Clifton gaining 1.1 ounces of weight, a substantial increase. This shoe now weighs in at 9.7 ounces or 277 grams. Now that we talked about what the shoe is like on paper, let's talk about what it's like on the road. All the changes to the Clifton 10 have resulted in what I think is a bit of a disappointment, or at least it's disappointing for a runner like me. The shoe is not really lining up with a lot of the preferences that I have for a shoe that I would use as a daily trainer. Overall, I feel like the changes to the heel drop and the continued use of compression molded EVA in the Clifton 10 result in a shoe that just feels flat. It's not as bouncy as the foam was in the Clifton 9. The change in drop made the shoe roll for me a little bit less well than the Clifton 9, and it certainly doesn't have the pace versatility that I thought the Clifton 9 had. Now, for years, people have been complaining about the fact that Hoka continues to use compression molded EVA in the Clifton series. And for years, I've been defending Hoka, saying compression molded EVA can be a very fun foam to use for daily training purposes. Not every shoe has to be carbon plated. Not every shoe has to have PIBA in it. The Clifton 9 was a prime example of that. I really enjoyed the way that that shoe felt stable, but also had bounce to it, also had a bit of fun to it. I feel like we lost a lot of that in the Clifton 10. And I'm not sure if they've changed the formula of the compression molded EVA. Maybe they went to a different manufacturer. I don't have that information for this shoe, but it seems like to me changing from a 5mm drop to an 8mm drop changes the nature of this shoe. It changes the nature of what the Clifton always has been, and it's made it something very different. It's a little bit more clunky as you transition from the back or the middle of the shoe into the forefoot. And so the lack of squishiness of the compression molded EVA that's in the Clifton 10 really starts to become apparent. And I think that they're just targeting a different type of runner. They're targeting a different type of customer with this shoe. Maybe they're looking over at some other brands, at their daily trainers that are doing really well in retail spaces, and realizing that a lot of those shoes, the shoes that tend to appeal to walkers, run walkers, those shoes tend to have some higher heel drops. And so maybe the Clifton is starting to see the pressure there. At least that's what I think is happening with this shoe. I haven't had a chance to talk with Hoka about this one specifically, but based on the changes that I'm seeing on paper and what I'm feeling underfoot, it seems like this is no longer really like the marshmallow experience that high mileage runners are looking for. Now we're losing a lot of that and getting into yet another shoe that's trying to feel a lot like the Ghost, at least when you're trying it on at the store. And so this is going to be the first year where I really feel like I'm disappointed that Hoka hasn't changed the midsole foam from compression molded EVA to something else, especially because this year, earlier in the year, they changed the Bondi 9 to be a shoe that had supercritical EVA. And I really enjoyed the change in that shoe. And the Bondi has been a shoe that I've long written off as a shoe that's not intended for runners anymore. It's really a walker's or a run walker shoe. And not to say that those people aren't running. Those people are very welcome in the running community, and I love to see them out there. But the kinds of shoes that are great for them and their gait and their ground contact time is different than the kinds of shoes that I tend to prefer. And I understand that. I've not been mad at the Bondi for that, but as Hoka shifted the Bondi from compression molded EVA to supercritical EVA, I felt like, okay, well, maybe this is an attempt at Hoka to bring that shoe back into the realm of targeting more runners. And I was thinking that because of the design language that they've used that mimics a lot of the design features of the Bondi, that the Clifton would have done the same thing. So when I look at the website and I see that still compression molded EVA, I feel like we've gotten a shoe that's a step or many steps backwards. Now, the flip side of that is, as much as I'm not on board with the changes to the Clifton 10, I'm going to try and not fault Hoka too much for the changes that they have made. Because at the end of the day, or I guess end of the quarter or fiscal year, I think that this is going to make the Clifton 10 a more popular shoe. I think they're going to end up selling more units of it. The step-in comfort is really nice, and given the shoes that they're trying to compete against, I feel like now they have a more similar feeling shoe. And I think that there are a lot of people that are going to really enjoy it. Walkers, run walkers, and runners alike. I'm not saying all runners are going to dislike the shoe. I think that there are going to be a strong percentage of people that are going to enjoy the changes to the Clifton 10. For those people who haven't liked the direction of shoes getting taller and squishier, I feel like this is going to be a refreshing kind of reversion, I guess, to the kinds of shoes that they remember running in long ago. But whether or not the Clifton 10 is going to work for you is going to definitely depend on what your specific preferences are and what your idea of comfort is and what your idea of softness in a shoe is. Before we wrap up this video, let's take a moment to zoom out and see where the Clifton 10 sits within the broader Hoka lineup. Now, whenever I start with a brand, I always like to start with a daily trainer, and from Hoka, that is the Clifton 10. This is a shoe that you could use for most of your runs, for most of your days, or at least that's the way it's intended. And it has the comfort and durability built in to handle that kind of use. Now, if you want to have a little bit more cushion and comfort, then the Hoka shoe that you would be looking at is the Bondi. This is Bondi version 9. This is the version that looks very similar in terms of styling to the Clifton 10, but the Bondi 9 gets super critical EVA this year, and I feel like it was a very welcome and surprising change to a shoe that I had thought for years now was just never really going to change all that much. So I'm really happy with the changes to the Bondi 9. It's a great max cushion shoe that has a lot of comfort, but it's not too squishy of a shoe, so I feel like a lot of people can get along with it. Now, from a racing perspective, Hoka has two options for you. They have the Rocket X3 and the Cielo X1 2.0. And I feel like these are kind of alternatives. So they're not going to really exist for most people in the lineup at the same time, unless you are sponsored by Hoka or a Hoka ambassador. So I feel like you're going to get one or the other. A lot of it's going to come down to preferences. And so these days, the question isn't so much, does carbon-plated racing shoes work for you or not? It's which carbon-plated racing shoe works for you for most people. And so you're going to be choosing one or the other. Personally, I love the Cielo X1 2.0. I love the first one. I think the second one is quite different, but also quite an improvement, and I really like it a lot. Now, in this space between the daily trainer and the racing shoe, there's usually a shoe in a lineup called the Tempo shoe, and from Hoka, that used to be the Rincon for quite a while, but I'm not really sure. I haven't tested it in a while, but I'm not really sure what's going on with that shoe. It's now becoming kind of a budget option, and instead what I'll talk about here is the Mach 6. Now, the Mach 6 is technically a daily trainer. That's normally where I think about it. But I do feel like for a lot of people, this shoe can kind of sit in that Tempo shoe spot in the lineup. Normally, I would consider them to be alternatives based on your preferences. You're going to like one or the other. The Mach 6, which I have been loving, does use supercritical EVA. The Clifton 10 does not. But I do want to keep them in this lineup at the same time for a moment, just because there's a whole other line of shoes that I want to talk about from Hoka. So let's start moving some of these shoes around. Now, Hoka does make stability shoes like the Arahi, which is basically a stabilized version of the Clifton, but they've also been making a lot of kind of like light stability shoes. And so across from the Bondi, there is another shoe in the lineup that I think fits, and I think it's best explained as a slightly stabilized version of the Bondi. And that for me is the Skyward X. It has carbon in it, but not a carbon fiber plate from the propulsive kind of way that you might see in the Cielo X1 2.0 or in the Rocket X2. They're on the Rocket X3 right now, but Hoka hasn't sent that one to me yet. So we'll talk about the Rocket X2. The plate here is very different. It's a H plate. And so it's really designed more to be a structural support member to increase stability. And then if you look at the giant sidewalls that are on this shoe, the foam is designed to kind of cup and hold on to that heel and prevent it from turning around side to side. They are using some advanced materials in this shoe as well. So it's a very pleasant shoe for a lot of people to run in. People have been racing a lot of marathons in this shoe as well, or longer distances. But it's a very fun cushion shoe that I feel like is a great max cushion shoe that has stability in it. Now, I tend to not love stability shoes, so there's times where I disagree with the shoe or it disagrees with me. There's a little bit of tension there. But I feel like for a stabilized max cushion shoe, that can pick up the pace a little bit. The Skyward X is pretty fun. And then from the Clifton, there's a slightly stabilized version, less stable than the Rahi, which is the Sky Flow. I feel like these two shoes are very similar, but I actually prefer the Sky Flow, even though it has kind of light stability type elements to it. The way that the medial side is kind of built up prevents the shoe from like a structural perspective of caving in too much when your foot hits the ground. And it kind of gives me that light stability feel to it, but it's also just a lighter shoe. It's a peppier shoe. It's the same kind of foam, if I'm not mistaken, but it has the older drop, the 5mm drop that's in there. And overall, it's still a light and surprisingly enjoyable kind of everyday ride, if not a little bit on the old school side, but I actually really like that one for light stability. And then for light stability across from the Mach, there is the Mach X. This is Mach X version 2. Now, a lot of you guys will say, well, this is the speed shoe that exists in the Hoka lineup. This shoe does have a plate, but it is not a carbon fiber plate. And again, I suspect it's really in there to aid these giant sidewalls that are on the back of the shoe to keep the shoe from caving in one way or the other as your foot hits the ground. It's there for stability and not propulsion. And so even though this does have some PIBA in here, so some advanced foams, I feel like it is basically a slightly stabilized version of the Mach, which is a very versatile daily training shoe, can be used as a speed work shoe, but ultimately it's a daily training shoe. And that's kind of feel like where the Mach X2 is as well. So while I do think that there are a lot of people who are going to disagree with the way that I've separated these two sections of shoes, this is the way it makes sense to me. They're neutral shoes versus their light stability shoes. Now let's wrap up this video by going over the buying guide, and we'll also discuss some of the alternatives. The Clifton has always been a really great way to introduce someone to Hoka if they've never tried Hoka before. And I think the Clifton 10 probably still is the best way to introduce someone to the brand and its standards. But the decision to change the heel drop while not changing the midsole foam indicates to me that the target new customer that Hoka is looking to capture is a little bit different. The Clifton is no longer a refreshing anti-Pegasus alternative. Instead, it's a shoe that you should consider along with the Brooks Ghost. The Clifton 10 is available now for a price of $155, which I think is very spicy. I don't really like the price of this shoe at all. I think for those of you who have enjoyed Cliftons in the past, you should see if you can find inventory of the Clifton 9 in your size, because you can find it for about $115 now, which is a fantastic price for what you're getting in that shoe. But let's also take a look at some of the competition to see what they have to offer. Now, the first shoe that I thought of when I put on the Clifton 10 comes from Diadora, and this is the Nucleo 2. Now, I feel like a lot of Diadora shoes have looked, I think, somewhat too similar to Hoka shoes in the past couple of years. And I feel like the Nucleo 2 versus the Clifton 9 or the Clifton 10 is the most glaring example of that. I feel like there's a lot of similarities in the silhouettes and the way that these shoes are set up, and at least previously in the types of runners that these shoes were trying to attract. Now, the main differences between the Clifton 10 and the Nucleo 2 is that even though I think that the Nucleo 2 is using an EVA-based foam, they found a way to make it a lot softer. So I feel like I like the cushioning that's in the forefoot of the shoe, but they have also put some kind of stability-like elements in the shoe as well, so you're not going to come crashing in. And they've really amped up all the puffiness of it. The material in the upper is very puffy. The puffiness all through the heel cup and on their even bigger Achilles flare is much more plush. So the idea of comfort is something that they're definitely trying to convey in this shoe. You're going to be paying extra for that Diadora logo on the side of that shoe though, because that one comes in at $165. And then the other shoe that I think is worth mentioning in this discussion is a shoe from Brooks, and this is the Ghost Max version 3. Now, these two shoes look very different, but I feel like these two shoes are targeting the exact same runner. Now, the experiences that I'm getting from both of these shoes are that even though they both look very plush and very comfortable, while also still being able to pick up the pace a little bit if I needed to in these shoes, I feel like the way that my body and my feet are interacting with these shoes leaves me feeling like I want a little bit more. The foams feel a little bit lackluster to me compared to what I think they really could be doing had they been kind of designed and set up a little bit differently. But I definitely feel like it's a lot of preferences at play here, and I think that there are a lot of you out there who have been loving the Ghost Max 3 for exactly the way that it is and exactly the way that it's set up. Again, this is another shoe that has a lot more plush cushioning all throughout the heel cup and in the tongue of the shoe, so it's a lot more comfort oriented than the Clifton 10 is, and it is a lot heavier. But I feel like the people that are looking at the Clifton 10 should also be taking a look at the Ghost Max 3, and you might be surprised to find that you are picking the Brooks in this situation. The Ghost Max 3 also has a bit of a spicy price though, and I wish it were just a little bit cheaper. That one comes in at a retail price of $160. So in this subcategory of shoes that don't really work for me, but might be ideal for a specific type of runner, I feel like there's about a 10 to 15% increase in prices that I just don't think is necessary. So those are my thoughts on the Clifton 10. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions about this shoe or any of the shoes that I talked about today, or better yet, stop by the live stream that I do Mondays and Thursdays over on the Kofuzi Run Club channel. I'd love to see you guys over there in the chat. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I will see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?